When Stormgate was first announced, it felt like the next big RTS in gaming. A spiritual successor to StarCraft and StarCraft 2, it promised to revive a genre that had been slowly dying for the last decade. But fast forward to today, and the excitement has faded. Interest has dwindled, player engagement has dropped, and the game that once had the RTS community buzzing is now struggling to hold on to its players. So what happened? How did Stormgate go from one of the most anticipated strategy games in the last 10 years to a title fighting to keep its audience? Let's break it down. Oops, wrong studio. Now, there's an elephant in the room to discuss here. Stormgate has some very big shoes to fill. As a game worked on by former developers of StarCraft 2 and a studio co-founded by Legacy of the Void director Tim Morton and lead Frozen Throne designer Tim Campbell, expectations were high, to say the least. Fans weren't just looking for a good RTS, they were looking for the next RTS, something that could stand alongside StarCraft and Warcraft in the Hall of Fame. But that's not what happened, and I think the mistakes made by Frost Giant Studios in the game's infancy have tarnished the community's first impressions of this game. That's not to say games can't come back from shaky launches. Think of games like No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk, which made great comebacks. But Frost Giant will have to be very strategic and careful in how they come back from this. And based on the studio's current business practices, I'm not so sure they're making the right choices. It's no question that Stormgate has an identity heavily entangled with StarCraft's. The game features the Terran, the Protoss, and the Zerg, all fighting on maps that look like they were ripped from the Warcraft universe. You can argue that I'm being a bit harsh, since these factions do have a sort of identity, but if you spend a few minutes with each one, their inspiration from StarCraft quickly becomes apparent. This in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem, but it leaves the impression that the developers intended for this game to be a sort of StarCraft 2 replacer. Subtlety and inspiration are one thing, but when you have word-for-word copies of dialogue like this,
You scared me.
you want to make damn sure your game lives up to the legacy of the Void that its spiritual predecessor left behind. Think of it like this. If you have a game that doesn't deliver what StarCraft delivered, while constantly reminding your audience of StarCraft, you'll eventually drive them away to play more StarCraft. In all fairness, recreating what Blizzard achieved is difficult. The Reddit post by Decent4Ever343 sparked some dialogue on this topic. StarCraft 2's mechanics are timeless, so why aren't new RTS games reaching the same heights? Redditor pfire777 made a good point in the comments. The real problem is that StarCraft is too good of a game. Mechanically, it's so well done, it's difficult for another studio to surpass it. And this super cool Redditor elleixstarcraft further emphasized the point. This is the answer in my opinion. I don't think it's that a new RTS wouldn't make money. A modern RTS with the engagement StarCraft 2 had when it came out would bring in tons of money with events, esports, etc. It's just that StarCraft 2 is way too difficult to emulate. Looking at Stormgate alone kind of tells it all. Years in development, a huge budget, and the game still feels like it plays underwater. It's like my units are walking around in the mud. It's important to note that this comment was made after my initial beta test impression of the game, since I never bothered returning to it after its official early access release. So I booted up the game, queued up for ladder, and I didn't hate it. Sure, being an early access title, it's rough around the edges, but I could see where they were trying to go with the core gameplay, and I won't lie to you guys, it was pretty fun, but something about it felt off. Circling back to the point we just made, the identity crisis of this game was apparent, and it made me feel like something was missing. It got me thinking, there's more complexity to it than just a certain lack of identity. I acknowledge I have my own biases favoring StarCraft, but not everyone who jumps into Stormgate will have necessarily experienced StarCraft 1 or StarCraft 2. I absolutely think the identity crisis is a contributing factor, but not the sole factor. The question is, why has user engagement dropped so heavily since the early access release? To put it into perspective, on launch, Stormgate hit its peak concurrent players at 4,456. Not amazing by any means, but it was the only data we had to run with. The following month, though, it had already dropped over 72%, and by the time of recording this video in early March, we're now looking at a peak of 212 players in the last 30 days, with a peak of 105 the last time I checked. That is a monumental drop, and for an RTS game that relies heavily on competitive multiplayer to stay alive, it doesn't bode well for the future of Stormgate. Of course, game design is always something we need to look at in these scenarios. I won't go too deep here because content creator Uppatree created a behemoth of a video going into detail of gameplay and design. However, I do want to draw attention to one point he made about the game's sound design because it's something I noticed in my own playtesting. In StarCraft 2, you have comprehensive sound coverage of all your actions. If you select a command center from across the map, you have audio confirmation that it's selected. In Stormgate, you need to have your camera within vision of what you're selecting. If your camera is over another part of the map, you get absolutely no audio confirmation that it's selected. This makes you feel like you're playing the game half blind. And in RTS games, you're required to have split-second reaction times and decision-making. This is a huge miss on Frost Giant's part. And you know what? I think it's best I show you this in action. Alright, we're in game. We have the start of a base. Ignore the fact that I'm floating 3,000 minerals. This is a video for science. I select my command center. We hear the command center. I select the barracks. We hear the barracks. Obviously, if I select a worker, I'm going to hear the worker. Now let's say I'm scouting somebody. I decide to hotkey my command center and select it from here. We hear the command center. We get that audio confirmation that we got it. I select the barracks. Obviously, we hear that one too. I select a worker, and he responds to us. Now let's take a look at Stormgate and compare, and you'll see what I mean. Here we are in Stormgate, and I actually discovered something even more frustrating than what I was describing, which is crazy. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. But here we go. We have our main base. We select our command post. We get that audio cue. We select the workers. We hear them respond. We select the dog. He barks at us. We get an audio cue, right? Now let's say we're scouting. We go to another part of the map. I go ahead and I select my command post. Nothing. We don't hear that audio cue, and I don't want to be looking at my UI to make sure I have the right thing selected when there's a bunch of action going on the map. I rely on those audio cues to tell me I selected what I intended to select. To be fair, if I select my workers, we hear them, right? So we go to our workers,
Your directive.
and they say something, right? But if we select things too quickly,
At your disposal.
and I select my dog, for example, which I just did, he doesn't bark at us. Now, I think this translates to the hotkeys. So let's say I select the worker.
You scared me.
He responds. I select the dog. He doesn't say anything to us, so we don't know what we're selecting. Yes, we can see in the UI the dog is selected, and ideally we know what our hotkeys are mapped to, but we rely on those audio cues in RTS gaming.
How can I
I
help?
select the worker, I select the dog, nothing. I select the dog, he barks at us, I select the workers, nothing. That is such frustrating game design, and that is unacceptable, honestly, in an RTS. To be fair, this is early access, but this is something that's so basic, and I would expect devs coming from Blizzard into Frost Giant to understand that. You get what I mean. Sure, there may be some artistic elements and unit models that are subjective, and I'm not necessarily a fan of the cartoony style, but the sound design itself is objectively bad. You can't expect players in a competitive or professional setting to rely on user interface in the middle of a match when they want eyes on their units. To drive this point home even further, the unit audio cues are inconsistent, so while they may respond once, they might not a second time. The game is basically gaslighting you into questioning what you have selected. This sort of design choice will have players developing trust issues with the game mechanics, and ultimately will drive them to a more polished product like StarCraft 2. One thing I will say though, the soundtrack absolutely slaps. Alright, enough about sound design. These are things that can be cleaned up as the game ages and moves on from early access to fully released title. However, first impressions still matter, even for early access. If you leave a bad taste in the mouths of your players, or give them the impression that you don't care about the player experience, you run the risk of driving them away forever. Let me show you what players experience when they first hop onto this game. So as it stands at the time of recording this video, this is the landing page for Stormgate. We have a new microtransaction bear that's featured here. It's a pet. It's Choco Bear. I can't be mad about this one, though, to be fair, because this is a charity event that donates money to advance pediatric care and research. Not a bad thing at all to feature on your landing page, but if we go to the store, this is where it gets kind of weird. Keep in mind, this game is in early access. It's not a fully released title, and we have a lot of featured microtransactions here, and not all of them are cosmetic, and that is the worst part. We have Riker, which is a hero. We have Castiel, which is a hero. Both of these guys cost you $10 a piece. That's $20 for 2 heroes, plus the early access bundle, which I already bought. That runs you $25. To be fair, it does give you access to missions and also a hero, but still, I'm not entirely sure if the value for money is there. So, from the featured page alone, not including the cosmetics, this is $45 if you want all this, and this one pisses me off the most, man. Souls of the Fallen. What is this? This is a reshade of the Fog of War. Why are you selling us a reshade of the Fog of War when you have a game to be working on? I understand you need funds, but trying to sell us a Fog of War for $5 is a slap to the face, especially when you have a game that hasn't delivered what it's promised. Man, that one is rough. And not only do we have these options, we have co-op heroes. And take a look at this. Not including the 3 heroes that we already went over, we have 3 more. We have Malok, we have Orellana, and we have Wars. So in total, we have 6 heroes that we can buy, and guess what? That's $60 total if you want all these heroes. They're $10 a piece. I just can't justify purchasing these given the current state of the game. It's not confidence inspiring, and it's especially not confidence inspiring for a new player. Now, to be fair, because of the early access bundle, I do have access to all these missions, which I have not played yet. I am admittedly looking forward to taking a look at them at the very least. But like I said, $25 for what is this, 6 missions and a hero? I'm not entirely sure I can justify that. Now, microtransactions aside, let's take a look at the custom lobby. Oh, guess what? We only have roughly, on average, 100 concurrent players a day. The lobbies are typically going to be empty. And when you're a new player wanting to practice the game, this is your only option to play unranked games. To be fair, though, you can create a lobby. Oh, and take a look. We actually have one game that just opened up, but we can create a lobby. And here we go. Now we have a private lobby with an AI. We have Peaceful Bot, we have Basic Bot, and we have Practice Bot. So this is a good way to practice the game. But again, it's not really confidence inspiring when the custom lobbies are usually empty. And RTS relies on a competitive scene. If you don't have a competitive scene, what do you have with your RTS, especially an early access RTS with only 6 missions available? Now, where the competitive scene is concerned, we do have a ladder, and even though we only have, like I said, roughly 100 plus concurrent players a day, the wait times in ladder aren't too long, but my concern is the disparity of skill levels, right? If you have a new player coming in, and this is exactly why I'm in Bronze League actually, I was paired with the same guy twice in a row. I got my ass kicked 2 times because he clearly had experience where I did not. That is also something that's not very confidence inspiring for a new player. When you enter the ladder and you see such a disparity of skill levels, you kind of feel like you're getting smurfed right off the bat. It's really hard to feel like you're progressing in this game without joining the custom lobbies, and the custom lobbies are usually empty. And like I said, this is your only option to play non-ranked games. So effectively, what the game has to offer new players are empty, unranked lobbies, a skewed distribution in the skill level of the players in the ranked lobbies, 6 missions if you're willing to fork out $25, and a game in early access riddled with microtransactions. In part, I think this is the answer to why user engagement is in the dirt. You had a title that had a relatively okay early access launch, right? 4,000 players, not amazing, not horrible, but then we had a 70+% drop after the first month. If you have a game that's riddled with microtransactions before it's even ready to be a game, that's going to drive user engagement away, and it shows a certain lack of integrity. Now, I don't think this game itself was intended to be a cash grab. You don't just build a new studio, develop a game, pocket the money, and bail. Looking at the game, I feel like the passion was there. I could see the vision they were going for because, like I said, I actually had fun playing the matches when I was making this video. But Frost Giant lost their way somewhere along the journey. Maybe they felt that the development process was taking longer than expected, and upper management wanted to see some fruits of their labors, driving them to riddle the game with microtransactions and purchase options that will cost consumers the price of a fully released title for the fraction of a game. Because let's be honest, it wasn't ready, even for early release. Greed can lead to poor business practices, shortcuts, push for early releases before the games are even ready, and push for microtransactions for a game that really can't justify them. And it leaves a bad taste in the mouths of the players who so desperately wanted to see the RTS genre come back to life, especially given the fact that this game was backed by developers who had experience with the very best the industry had to offer, or at least once upon a time. First impressions are important, and Frost Giant Studios' business decisions paired with their questionable game design choices during the game's most critical point of marketing, in my opinion, are some of the contributing factors to Stormgate's failure to launch. I badly want this game to succeed, but until Frost Giant cleans up their act and shows players that they care about the player experience, it will continue to fall into obscurity until it's forgotten. Thanks for watching.